Okay, so here's the weird, interesting, true history about NASA and how the governments of the world have always been involved in occulticism. They've always been involved in hidden witchcraft and dark arts, or whatever you want to call it. And this isn't a conspiracy. This isn't some crazy out there outlandish theory made up by a bunch of randos on the internet. This is completely 100% verifiable facts, and anybody in the entire world has access to the information through a quick Google search. So, in other words, if you don't already know some of this stuff, which some of the stuff you might know if you ever pay attention to any real history teachers, and then other stuff here you might not know, and if you never do your own research, and maybe you only listen to whatever, I don't know, the official narrative, and they never talk about this kind of stuff. But the real reason is why. Why don't they talk about this kind of stuff? So, anyways, as you know, in World War II, there was Adolf Hitler, and the majority of all of his higher-ups that were around him practiced the occult. Whether you would know that or not, I don't know, but it is true. You can do your deep dig research into that and find out that it's true. Adolf Hitler, along with the Axis powers, went against the United States of America and the quote-unquote Allied powers, right? And we know the story. And at first, Soviet Union, Russia was on the side of Adolf Hitler, and then he turned his back on them, and they decided to join the Allied powers, and they went to war with him. And eventually, they fought the Nazis all the way back and defeated Adolf Hitler in World War II, right? Okay. And then this is how you get NASA. This is how NASA was created, okay? What happened is that after Germany surrendered and Adolf Hitler killed himself and the war was over, there were a bunch of Nazi scientists, right? I mean, the Nazi scientists were considered some of the smartest, most brightest scientists in the world at that point. Of course they were. They were the first ones to really change the entire landscape of the way that modern warfare existed, which is why World War II was such a pivotal point, not only for its historical context, but what it did from the military context, from military machines as well. It's because of World War II that airplanes and so many other things were used in warfare for the first time. And a lot of that is attributed to the Nazis, right? To the Nazi scientists. That's because Adolf Hitler forced all the brightest and best scientists to work for him, and there were German scientists and there were Jewish scientists, interestingly enough, and there were many scientists from anything you could think of, and anytime Adolf Hitler would conquer a territory or a nation or whatever it was, he would go grab their brightest scientists and force them to work with him, or else they would be murdered, right? And that's how he got this world-renowned group of the best scientists in the world, right? One of which was Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was a half German, half Jew scientist who is probably one of the most, if not the most famous pre-Nazi scientist that there ever was. People don't talk about him being a Nazi scientist because they talk about what happened after the fact, because, long story short, he knew what the Nazis were working on because he was working for them against his own free will, but being half Jewish and half German, he was probably in a peculiar position there, right? And he knew that they were working on a big bomb and some of the crazy Nazi scientific projects that they were working on. So he wrote a letter to the United States of America explaining to them that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were creating this big giant bomb, and that if they didn't do something about it quick, he would use it on them. So in exchange for America coming in there and getting him and picking him up and saving him from the Nazi regime, he would help them and give them all the information he had. So, of course, we went and grabbed Albert Einstein from behind enemy lines, brought him over to the United States of America, and then he helped us create the atom bomb, the Manhattan Project, right? Which we used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II, essentially. Okay. So that was just one of the many Nazi scientists at one time that Adolf Hitler had. There were many other Nazi scientists that he had. So many, it's really, who knows the actual number, right? And Anyways, long story short, after the World War II ended, the USSR and the United States of America were fighting each other over who would get all of that, right? When they were splitting up the spoils of war, they decided that they would split, they split up so bad that they had to split Berlin down the middle, right? That's why there was two sides to Berlin. One, the communist side under subjection of the USSR, the other capitalistic side under the subjection of the western part of Europe. That all happened as a result of World War II, and because communism and capitalism can't coexist, even after they've defeated their common enemy, now they are dealing with each other, at least to the Cold War. Anyway, they took all the Nazi scientists, after they put the trials of all the Nazis and all the Nazi scientists never got in trouble for being a part of the Nazis and helping with the Holocaust or anything, because they were so brilliant that our CIA and the powers of the world decided that they would be more useful if they helped us create technology like the Nazis had, or even better. So we split the Nazi scientists right down the middle and said the USSR gets half of them and the United States of America gets half of them. When the Soviet Union got half of those Nazi scientists, that's what created Sputnik and started the space race, right? That came from Nazi scientists. And then we, the United States of America, turned that into an interesting organization that you probably heard of called NASA, NASA, right? And that's called Operation Paperclip. That's a real operation. This is not a conspiracy. It's really what happened. There's a whole book on it called Operation Paperclip. You should read it if you've never heard that story before. Yeah, you go on CIA.gov and look at the declassified documents and they'll tell you Operation Paperclip, so on and so forth. Anyways, interestingly enough, okay, so one of the people that was a part of the early days of NASA, also called the father of rocketry by many people, and was one of the first, is widely credited with being one of the first, and maybe even the first person that ever created rockets and ever created propulsion systems. It was the first one to launch a rocket in the air. His name is Jack Parsons, right? Well, an interesting thing, and you can research all of this. In fact, I encourage you to take 20 seconds and Google Jack Parsons and find out, and you'll find out everything I'm about to tell you. Jack Parsons, interestingly enough, was an occultist. He was an outspoken occultist. He followed a religion after another very outspoken occultist by the name of Aliester Crowley, right? So let me just read to you a little bit about Jack Parsons and exactly who Jack Parsons, the father of rocketry. John Whiteside Jack Parsons, 1914 to 1952, was a brilliant American rocket engineer and chemist recognized as the founding father of modern rocketry. He was also a passionate and unconventional occultist, a follower of Aleister Crowley's Thelema, I think that's how you say that, whose double life blurred the lines between science and mysticism. Okay? Rocketry, and he was the founding of JPL and Aerojet. Parsons was a co-founder of both the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, and the Aerojet Engineering Corporation. These institutions became foundational to the American space program. A self-taught prodigy, he pioneered the development of stable composite solid fuel rocket propellant. His fuel technology was more stable and provided greater thrust than earlier compounds and was later adapted for use in NASA's space shuttle and various ballistic missiles. Parsons' early work was part of the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory, or the JALCIT rocket research group at Caltech, where the team's dangerous and explosive experiments earned them the nickname the Suicide Squad, right? Interestingly enough, and that's where a lot of people get the movie Suicide Squad, right? Because it's always hidden in culture, and that's what it is. But anyways, dismissal from JPL and Aerojet, his career in rocketry ultimately ended due to his high-risk laboratory conduct and his scandalous involvement with the occult. He was dismissed from both JPL and Aerojet in 1944. Now, Jack Parsons, this is not some weird, crazy, out there, radical guy, right? No, this is the father of rocketry, who is credited with being one of the very first people that ever made rockets ever shoot off the face of the earth in the first place, right? An occultist. An outspoken occultist. In fact, we'll go deeper into the history of that, right? In 1939, Parsons became an ardent follower of Thelema, the new religious movement founded by British occultist Aliester Crowley. He became the head of Crowley's Agape Lodge in Pasadena, which attracted bohemian types and became notorious for its open sexuality and drug use. One of Parsons' most infamous magical rituals was the Babylon working, quote-unquote, in 1946, assisted by science fiction writer and future Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. Parsons attempted to summon the Thelemic goddess Babylon to Earth. So what you see, the father of rocketry, right, who's a part of this cult, right, this occultist cult, and gets dismissed from American rocketry because of his outspoken involvement in this occult, actually in this occult was creating Babylon working, because they say a lot of that's rooted in Babylon mysticism, which we've talked about before. And also the fact that in that cult, he was friends with a science fiction writer and by a very famous man by the name of Ron Hubbard, who, as you may know, is the one who created Scientology and is the founding father of Scientology, right? This is all real. You can research all of it. Parsons' association with Hubbard ended when Hubbard and Parsons' girlfriend defrauded Parsons of his life savings. The incident involving yachts and ended with Parsons performing the occult ritual to bring Hubbard to shore during a storm. Parsons' wild lifestyle involvement in a love cult drew the attention of the FBI, which investigated him multiple times for allegations of blackmail and espionage. His security clearance was ultimately revoked, ending his career in military rocketry. Parsons died at the age of 37 in a home laboratory explosion in 1952, although ruled an accident by police associates suspected suicide or foul play. While his occulticism overshadowed his work for decades, historians now recognize Parsons' significant contributions to rocket engineering and the foundation of the U.S. space program. A crater on the far side of the moon was named in his honor in 1972. Parsons' bizarre and fascinating life has been the subject of several books, articles, and a television series called Strange Angel, right? Okay, so that's the hidden occulticism roots of the space rocketry program in NASA. But that's just where it starts, right? It gets weirder, doesn't it? It definitely does. Let me tell you who his leader was, right? Where the cult that he joined, Aliester Crowley. If you've never heard of him, this is another really interesting name, right? It's also interesting how it all comes together. Let me just explain this to you, okay? Jack Parsons was a devout disciple of the English occultist Aliester Crowley, embracing Crowley's philosophy of philema. While Parsons was a brilliant and pioneering rocket scientist, his dedication to Crowley's magical system shaped his life, career, and relationships, blurring the line between science and mysticism, right? Parsons became a Thelemite in 1939 and a member of Crowley's esoteric order, the Order Templi Ortius, or the OTO. He was initiated into the Agape Lodge in California branch in 1941. Recognizing Parsons' charisma and devotion, Crowley appointed him to head the California OTO branch in 1942. Parsons converted his Pasadena home on Orange Grove Avenue into the Agape Lounge's temple. He hosted occult rituals and orgies, attracting a bohemian crowd that the FBI investigated as a quote-unquote love cult. In 1946, Parsons began performing a series of rituals with his new friend and spiritual student, Ron Hubbard. Okay, so the future founder of Scientology, known as the Babylon Working. The rituals were intended to summon the Thelemic goddess of Babylon, right? But some people call, which goes all the way back to ancient Babylonian mysticism, and if you ever read the Bible, all of that's mentioned in the Bible. That's where you get the Tower of Babel from, and they babbled on, which is where you get the word Babylon from. And also, a lot of that has a lot to do with the early Catholic Church as well. And also, a lot of that has to do with a lot of things. and so Parsons died in a mysterious explosion in his home laboratory in 1952. Babylon is incarnate on the earth today. This was what he had written to Aliester Crowley before he died, right? Babylon is incarnate on the earth today, and in that day my work will be accomplished, and I will be blown away upon the breath of the fire. So a lot of people interpret that he was prophesying his own death, right? Or maybe prophecy wouldn't be the word there, since he's a Satanist and not a Christian. Maybe the word there would be divination, or whatever's a more appropriate word to use there that would make people feel more comfortable about what he said. But now, so the way you see it is you see that Jack Parsons, father of rocketry, his occultist student is Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, and now we're going to look at his mentor, the one that introduced him to the one that's actually more famous than he was and more influential than him, and that's Aliester Crowley. If you don't know who Aliester Crowley is, you need to know who he is, okay? Aliester Crowley was an English occultist, ceremonial magician, poet, novelist, mountaineer, and painter. He founded the religion of Thelema, identifying himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus. In the early 20th century, as a prolific writer, he published widely over the course of his life. Okay, so now we talked about Jack Parsons and his student, which was Hubbard, the creator of Scientology. So we talk about the mentor, Aliester Crowley. Aliester Crowley is the most famous occultist in the entire history of the last century, where he was called, quote unquote, by many governments, the most evil man alive, the most evil man on the face of the planet. And as the story goes, he became fascinated with this. When he read the book of Revelation, he became fascinated with this creature in the book of Revelation called the Beast, that had 7 heads and the prostitute that sat on top of its head. But he wasn't fascinated with Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation. By his own words, he became fascinated with the beast itself, and he wanted to emulate this beast and come into worldwide power and become the quote-unquote Antichrist. That's his own words, what he said. What he believed. Crazy. But the reason why he's so weird, right? Because there's many people that think and feel that way and say these kind of things, but the reason that Aliester Crowley really stands out is because he had much influence in the world sphere on a global level. He had influence in politics, intelligence agencies, governments, NASA, culture, and so on and so forth. So Aliester Crowley, he was born in 1875, died in 1947, was an English occultist, ceremonial magician, poet, and writer who founded the religion of Thelema. Known during his lifetime as the wickedest man in the world for his libertine lifestyle, Crowley later became a counterculture icon whose image and writings influenced artists and musicians from the 1960s onward. Born Edward Alexander Crowley in Lancashire, England, he was raised by wealthy and devoutly fundamental Christian parents, ironically enough. He rebelled against this upbringing from a young age, rejecting Christianity, engaging in behavior that his disapproving mother referred to as that of the beast, a title Crowley later adopted and embraced. The pursuit of varied interest. After inheriting a fortune from his father at age 11, Crowley attended the Trinity College, Cambridge. He never completed a degree, but spent his time pursuing interests in poetry, literature, and competitive chess. He also became a dedicated and accomplished mountaineer, participating in expeditions to K2, embracing the occult. After experiencing a mystical event in 1896, Crowley abandoned plans for a diplomatic career to focus on Western esotericism. He joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in 1898, where he was formally trained in ceremonial magic. He founded his religion and the Book of the Law while on his honeymoon in Cairo in Egypt in 1904. Crowley's wife received what he believed to be a message from a supernatural entity named Aiwass. Crowley transcribed the message into a sacred text, the Book of the Law, which became the constabulary text of the new religion of Thelema. Do what thou wilt was the core principle of Thelema and is stipulated in the phrase, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. For Crowley was not a call for Hinduism, but a mandate to discover and act upon one's true will or deeper purpose in life. In 1907, Crowley co-founded the AA, an esoteric order of the Propaganda of Thema. He was later initiated into the Ordo Templi Ortetius, the OTO, a German-based occult group, eventually becoming the head of its British branch. In 1920, Crowley founded a religious commune in Sicily called the Abbey of Thelema. His libertine lifestyle and rumored drug use and orgy rituals led to denunciation in the press, and he was ultimately expelled from Italy by their own government in 1923. He was kicked out of Italy by the Italian government. A bisexual and drug user, Crowley attracted widespread controversy throughout his lifestyle, which he often fueled himself. He became a chronic heroin addict and died in relative obscurity and poverty in 1947. Crowley's occult writings and his public persona as a rebellious anti-establishment figure made him a subject of fascination for later generations. Aliester Crowley developed a fascination and an obsession with all things the occult, especially ancient Egypt, Babylonian mysticism, Canaanite religions, and all forms of ancient occultic practices, right? He actually went into England and became and had ties to MI6, which is the British intelligence agency. They're kind of like the American, they're like the British CIA and Secret Service, and he had ties to them, so many ties to them, in fact, that he was almost kicked out of the British government because of his connections to all these governmental religions, or governmental political forces, but also the religions that were on the other side and underside of all of those things, right? And he actually was around that place during World War II when Adolf Hitler came to power. He tried to join the Freemasons at one point, and they didn't want him to join. He tried to convert. He actually said that he wanted to become the leader of the Freemasons and force all the Freemasons to convert to his religion. And he actually went to Germany during World War II while Adolf Hitler reigned because he wanted to become friends with Adolf Hitler, in his own words, because he believed that he could convert Adolf Hitler to his religious belief, and Adolf Hitler would be underneath him and help him create this beast order into the world, right? That's when he started to get denounced by the English government as well. Interestingly enough, he had ties to British intelligence. He was kicked out by the Italian government, had many governmental ties, many intelligence ties, ties to NASA and rocketry, as we said, with Jack Parsons, which led to Scientology with Rob Hubbard. All of this is not a conspiracy. This is not make-believe. This is not a connection that someone is putting there, that they put all the pieces together and connected the dots. That's not what this is. This is verifiable historical accuracy. Facts. 100% did happen, right? It sounds so insane and so crazy and so ridiculous that it's almost hard to believe that this is true. But it's so true that there is no human being on the face of the planet that debunks it, right? There's nobody that says that's not what happened, because it is what happened. It's so true that you could look it up on Google and find it on Wikipedia, because it's just the truth. But it's just something that your classrooms will never talk about because, I don't know, whatever reason, just because he's an occultist means he was any less a part of history. That doesn't make any sense. He's very influential in modern history. In fact, he was so culturally influential that his image famously appeared on the cover of the Beatles, one of the Beatles' album. In fact, you could go look it up. The name of that album is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, right? That album, Aliester Crowley is on the cover of the Beatles album because that's how much cultural influence he had, right? Led Zeppelin's guitarist, Jimmy Page, was a devotee of Crowley's work and brought the Bolkenstein house, which was Crowley's former home, near Loch Ness, ironically enough, where the Loch Ness Monster is from, right? And also, his work and philosophy influenced a variety of counterculture figures in modern new religious movements. He has been alluded to in every single cultural facet that you can think of. Modern day celebrities today still bring up Aliester Crowley. Lady Gaga knows who Aliester Crowley is, right? This is not some obscure, strange figure. But the point is that the occult, the government and culture and Hollywood and all these things people talk about, although not everybody involved in any of those things is an occultist or is in the dark arts or any of this kind of stuff and, crazy conspiratorial nonsense that a lot of people come up with, obviously, there's many great people in all those industries and fields. But the idea that nobody in that world is connected to the occult or the dark arts or any of that is a complete and blatant, utter lie. Not only is it such a lie, not only does people not need me to tell them that it is a lie, right? Not only do you not need me to tell you that because you already know that. In fact, if you're watching something like this, you probably are already under the persuasion that that's true, right? But the thing is that the point is that it's so true that you can't even let them talk you out of it and say that you're crazy, this weird conspiracy where you get all this gut feeling spiritual, which is the most important thing first, right? You should always listen to your gut before you listen to anything. Because it's your gut hunch, right? Your gut hunch, that flinch inside of you that actually causes you to investigate things and takes you to the leads that leads to the reality, that leads to the evidence and proof that backs up what you initially thought was true anyways, right? So this is really just all the outward evidence that anybody in the world can find with 15 minutes on a Google engine, can find in CIA.gov declassified documents and anything else under the sun that proves that the initial inclinations and gut feelings of NASA, the government, and music industry, Hollywood, and a lot of these connections behind the scenes aren't just some imaginary idea that's happening in the minds of raging, crazy-on conspiracy theorists who have no idea what's going on in the world, but is in fact happening inside of the minds of people who are deeply dedicated to research and look under every stone and find the real, true, hidden history of what's actually going on in broad daylight that nobody seems to want to talk about. Now, the interesting thing is, too, that people will say, well, it's not a hidden history, it's not a hidden knowledge, right? The word occult actually means the word hidden knowledge. And they say it's not a hidden history, but when's the last time you heard about Aliester Crowley inside of a public school? Or Jack Parsons? Even though these people completely affected history forever. Or that they were connected. That Jack Parsons, the father of rocketry, was a student of Aliester Crowley. Or that Jack Parsons' student was Hubbard, who founded the Church of Scientology. Which leads to Tom Cruise in Hollywood and all those actors, right? I mean, when's the last time you ever heard that in a public square? If it's not a quote-unquote hidden history, right?